I'm sitting down with my colleague, Devin Scillian, to talk about his career over the past 30 years as he looks ahead to the next chapter in his life. So how are you feeling, Devin, about your retirement?
You know, it's been, it feels right, but it also has been a little more overwhelming than I thought, just with I mean, people have been wonderful, but I've had a real struggle keeping up with emails and phone calls and messages. I mean, and it's been lovely. It really has. It's been very, very gratifying, but it was more than I expected.
Are you excited? Are you nervous? Are you like what's the
Probably
overall
a little
feeling?
bit of all those things. You know, people keep asking me, you know, what are you going to do? And I guess I feel a little bit like Cortez. When Cortez arrived in the New World, he burned his ships because he figured if there was no way for his men to turn around and go back to Spain, that they would be well motivated to succeed. And so I'm burning the ships. I don't exactly know what I'm doing, but, but I'm excited at the prospects. There's a lot of things that I had promised myself that I would get back to doing, and I haven't really done that yet. And as my friend Tom Sorrells says, you know, it's later than you think.
Yeah.
And I want to get to doing those things.
Talk about some of those things. We know you love to write. We know you love
Yeah.
music. What do you want to do?
Well, those are both a big part of it. I've never been able to devote as much energy or time into either writing books or writing music and performing music as I'd like. I've always had to try to, you know, fit that in around other things, and I'd like to give it a little bit more priority. But you know, when I left the University of Kansas, I originally went to KU to study theater. And I kind of I didn't really ever fall off the theater wagon because I stayed involved in theater even once I fell in love with journalism. And I think there was a real linkage between the two because what I loved about theater was live performance. And what I realized about broadcast news was it was live every day and the script changed constantly. And I found that pretty intoxicating. But I told myself I would get back to, you know, to theater. I've been able to do you know, some movies and things like that, because you know, like what you and I
Yeah.
got to do with Eminem.
Yeah.
Was that on your bingo card when you got into this business?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. So I feel really lucky that I've gotten to do as much as I have, and I don't take any of it for granted because I still can't believe it. But it would be fun to, you know, work on more voice work, all those kinds of things that I just find new challenges to take on, and they're all probably going to be something. Corey said to me a couple of months ago, she said, you know, we actually met in theater class in high school. And she said, you know, what I know about you and have known about you our whole lives is that you have a need to perform. And so it'll be doing something like that, I guess.
Where does that come from? Where does that love for theater come from? You've talked about your mom, Betty,
Yeah.
who did a lot of community theater kind of
Yeah.
thing.
That was where it started, that's for sure. I mean, she would take me, I would be in my little bassinet while she was up on stage at, you know, community theater productions. And then when I got old enough, I was in the boys band in the Music Man. And I was one of the little kids that Yenta the Matchmaker was toting around in Fiddler on the Roof. So I started even, you know, getting to perform even as a kid, and I just loved it. I still love it. Love the smell of backstage, the smell of makeup, you know, looking up and seeing the dust wave through the lights. I love everything about that world. And so it'd be fun to do. But yeah, it definitely, thanks, Mom.
Yeah, really, really, really. What has made Detroit such a special place for you to work and connect with viewers for the past 3 decades, would you say?
You know, when I got here, we really thought we would just be here for a little while and then move on. And there's something about this place that just really gets into your blood. And I didn't expect that when I first got here, because you know, things were tough around here in the mid-90s. You know, when we arrived in 1995, I felt like there was an awful lot of promise here. Dennis Archer was, seemed to be a new chapter and talked a lot about a new Detroit, and we thought we're going to be able to be a part of that and see a little bit of that before we left. But Bob Bennett, the late great Bob Bennett, Boomer, reporter of ours, came to me when I first week in town, and he said, "Devin, you're just not going to believe it. There's not another news town like this in the world. You're not going to believe it." And I just kind of, nodded my head, because every town thinks they're a great news town. Well, Bob was right. Bob was right, and it's been proven many, many times since. This will probably only make it online because it's a crazy story. But after Bob had told me that, and maybe he saw a little bit of my yeah in my eyes, about a week later, I'm anchoring the noon newscast, and Bob is the lead story. And this guy has set himself and his house on fire while trying to kill his mistress in the basement of a house with power tools. Horrendous story. Horrendous. I couldn't believe that. So I go to Bob, and Bob, pitches to his package. And while it's in the package, he says to the producer, "Have Devin ask me what this guy's job was." And the producer comes on in my ear and says, "Bob said you should ask him what his job was." And I'm like, "What? That seems like the least interesting thing about all this crazy stuff." And so we come out of the package, and I said, "Bob, this is horrible. Do we know anything about this guy? About, did he work?" And Bob, with a twinkle in his eye, looked at the camera and said, "Yes, Devin, he made artificial limbs for a living." And you could just tell Bob was telling me in his mind, "I told you." And it has been that way ever since. And this really is just an unreal news town, not just because weird, crazy things happen, but anytime something big happens in the world, there seems to be a Detroit connection. And of course, anytime anything happened with the big three, it was front page news of the Wall Street Journal and all the business papers around the world. It's an unbelievable sports town, one of the greatest anywhere in the world. So it really is just this, it's a buffet, and they just keep bringing out new plates all day long.
I love it. I love it. So true.
Yeah.
Um,
I also should say that I really came to admire the spirit of Detroit. It's been knocked down so many times over the years, and it just keeps getting back up. And that's why I love Dan Campbell. When he started talking about grit, that's a guy who totally understands where he is and what this city is all about. Absolutely. And that's what I love about Detroit, true. It's got grit.
Yeah, yeah. One of the many things I've always admired about you is your ability to be calm and have this just even keel about your whole personality, no matter how crazy the news is, how difficult it is. How do you do that?
That's a really good question. Rudyard Kipling wrote about the measure of a man being if he can keep his head while all about him is losing theirs. And so I've always, but I also think it's a big part of what we do. And my anchor man hero was Peter Jennings, and I don't remember ever seeing him ruffled. He was just always the coolest cat in the room, and that's part of the job. Somebody's got to be able to see through all of the fog and all the smoke, and keep things running. Not just keep things running, but keep things clear, balanced. Trying to keep, sometimes it is necessary to instill some calm. Think about 9/11.
Sure.
We didn't know what the heck was, going on around us all that day, those weeks, those months. So I guess I've always just thought that was part of the job. My dad was always that way. My dad was always a very cool customer, and I just admired that in other people, and always wanted that to be part of who I was too.
Yeah. Since you mentioned your dad, talk about Colonel Bill Scillian. We unfortunately just lost him. I know that you had made this decision to retire before. just talk about growing up and moving around from base to base,
Yeah.
and what he's meant to your life, and if this has any. Do you reflect more now that you've lost your dad and you're going to this new chapter in your life?
There's no doubt about it. Yeah, the decision was made before that, but since then, it's been, there's really no getting around that when you lose somebody like that, it becomes a way station in your life, and you stop and think about the things that are important. But when being born into a military household, by the time I was 18, we had moved about a dozen times. And I was so fascinated at all the different places. And if I could give everybody the gift of travel, my gosh, I wish I could. Because every place I've ever been has surprised me. Something has been different than wherever my expectations were.
Well, good day, Emery from Sydney, and it is not only a good day, it is a great day. Unbelievably beautiful weather on this Thursday afternoon here at the Olympic Village.
You were probably one of the few local journalists who can say that they've covered 10 Olympics. What has that been like for you to come here and have such an enormous opportunity to travel to all of these places, in addition to not just the Olympics? Like you said, you covered the Pope, you've been all over. What has that meant to you?
Part of that is the luck of being at an NBC affiliate, because NBC has locked up those Olympics, and if otherwise that wouldn't have happened. But my memories of the Olympics go so deep back into my, let's see, 1972 were the Munich Olympics, which of course we remember for horrible reasons with what happened to the Israeli athletes. But also that was the year of the craziness with the Soviet Union USA basketball game, where they added time to the clock, and it was insane, and that has stayed with me forever. And then 4 years later, I can still remember Franz Klammer in the downhill at Innsbruck winning the gold medal, and Bruce Jenner winning the gold medal in the men's decathlon that year in Montreal. And so the Olympics have just always loomed large to me anyway. I've always loved them. And then to get to go cover so many of them and be there for some really iconic moments. And my first Olympics, I started big, man. The first one they sent me to was Sydney, Australia. Oh my gosh, coolest city in the whole world. And I can remember I was on the phone trying to do play-by-play to Corey back at home as the opening ceremonies were going on, and all the water, I don't know if you remember this, but the water started rushing down the steps in the stadium. It was the most unbelievable opening ceremony thing. And I've just been so enamored with the pageantry of it. But then, as I've told you many times, the Olympics never let you down. As a storyteller, there's always going to be triumph, there's going to be heartbreak, there's going to be controversy, plenty of that. There's going to be these stories of someone who comes out of nowhere and succeeds on the world stage. It's just such a target-rich environment for a journalist, and to get to go to all those places. And not only do I get to cover the Olympics, but when I go to these places, I just learn so much about the places themselves, going through a favela in Rio, going to the DMZ, dividing North and South Korea. I mean, you name it. I've just come back so enriched by every one of those experiences. I hope I was able to impart some of that to people. I wouldn't want to think that it was all just for me.
No.
But Paris, then to end on Paris, and that just couldn't have been a better Olympics. And what an Olympic city. And I just, again, back to the luckiest guy on the planet. I mean, it's just unbelievable I've been able to do all that.
Yeah. Your dream of being a foreign correspondent, it's kind of been like, just the perfect job, it sounds like, that
really
you could
is.
still be at home with your family. Because I know sometimes just the other day, I feel like I said to you, is it Richard Engel that we were looking at? And I said, my gosh, Richard Engel has a family. Like, what is he doing? Like, how can he?
Yeah.
And just imagine you've been able to travel to all those places and still be, home at night.
Corey and I always say travel's great until it's all the time. And then it's not special, and then it's not fun. And so mine has been pretty surgical. And it hasn't just been, you know, I mean, going along with the Stanley Cup to Russia, with the, you know, with at the time the Russian, because of the Russian Five, um, going to Cuba and doing, you know, getting to look at all those unbelievable Detroit
Cars.
miraculous cars that are still running after all these years. Going to Germany for the first first merger for Chrysler, you know, the Daimler Chrysler merger. Italy a couple of times for things with the Catholic Church. Yeah, I can't believe how it's worked out. I mean, my favorite book is my passport. There's no doubt about it, and a passport is one that you get to write every time that you know that you make a trip, and I've been very, very fortunate on that front. And Tim Pamplin has been was a big part of that too. We became such, you know, such good, devoted friends. You learn a lot when you travel with somebody. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Tim getting to go to London, you know, Tim's old stomping grounds, and being around Cambridge for the Olympics, you know, was just such a thrill. Some people worry that when you travel, you gain a lot of weight. Well, most of the weight you gain is in your eyes. And I think that that's just a real gift that my dad's military life gave me. And I know it had a lot to do with me wanting to be a journalist. I'm sure it did. And, but not only that, of course, I watched this, you know, my dad was just a very deeply honorable man who was so mindful of the concept of duty. You know, John Adams said that there are two kinds of people in the world: those with a commitment and those who require the commitment of others. My dad had a commitment, and I was part of his commitment. Yeah, yeah. And I just, my brother and I just totally won the dad lottery. Yeah. And I think Mom feels the same way too. I mean, we just had this, you know, towering, honorable man in our lives who served his country twice in Vietnam, you know, made it to full colonel in the U.S. Army, retired after 29 years, almost exactly how long I've been at Channel 4. And then the other funny thing is going to be buried at Arlington. But then on the other side of his life, he was this insanely talented athlete, and you know all about his golf game and his 10 holes in one. I mean, it was just he was kind of an epic cat.
Yeah. So you're a titan of a dad too, to 4 grown adult children. And, you know, after me having my own kid, I think that one of the things that makes you a good parent is when your adult children want to still be around you. Mm-hmm. And call you, even when they don't really need you anymore. And each of your children tend to call you during the 6 o'clock newscast often.
They have no idea what Dad does for a living, apparently.
And you've been doing it all their lives at 6 o'clock every day, every weekday. But you know, I think that does say something, that you have this connection with still with your adult children, that they still call you for advice. And you know, it's been really the honor of my career to work alongside you and have a desk next to you in the newsroom and be able to hear the number of times they call for advice, and you never get angry that they're calling. You do say, hey, don't you know what I do for a living? Like, but you still take the time to say, hey, you know, I'll call you after the newscast, we'll talk about it. It's still very calm. Yeah. How have you been able to juggle this job as a news anchor and be such a titan of a dad to your kids?
Well, I think a big part of it is that they've got a titan of a mom. And Corey and I just had pretty strong ideas about the way we wanted to raise a family, and it's part of why we ended up staying in Detroit. You know, we got calls from places like New York, and I couldn't quite figure out how to raise a family in New York. Now, I love visiting New York, sure. But the jobs that I was interviewing for, network jobs, I would be on the road 2/3 of my life. And somebody, the year that Griffin, our oldest, was born, somebody said to me that week, either you're going to raise your kids or somebody's going to do it for you. And I didn't want somebody else to raise my kids, so that was part of it. deep in my journalist sort of makeup, I think my natural leanings would have been to be a foreign correspondent. It's, as you know, international news is just so endlessly fascinating to me. The travel, the intersection of all of this world of ideas and cultures, endlessly fascinating to me. But it's really no way to raise a family. I mean, when you're a foreign correspondent, you go to home, but you never see it. And so that was a big part of it. So Corey and I kept making choices, you know, to be here and to stay here because it just seemed like what was best for our family. And there's no, you know, my job has been, as you know, we work nights. There's a lot that goes on when kids come home from school. There's a lot that happens in a house at night. And so, you know, Corey is the glue that has really held us together. And I think that whatever strength our family has, that now I also get to be a part of, because I think you're right. I've got great friendships. My 4 kids are like my best friends. I love that about getting older with kids too. But Corey has been a huge part of that, of setting the die that this is how our family was going to be, and this was the expectation. We remained very, very tight, and I'm so, good gosh, that's so grateful for that.
Yeah. That's really, and it helps that you have such a short commute from the station.
That's
and
how we ended
home.
up where we live. It was the closest place I could find, you know, find to work, because I needed to be home to go to a school concert at night in between the newscasts if I could.
Hi, welcome to the inaugural edition of Flashpoint, our monthly forum on issues that are important.
What do you hope Local 4 viewers will remember most about you? What do you want your legacy to be?
Boy, oh boy, that's really tough. I mean, because it's going to be whatever somebody else decides. It's, you know, rather than being up to me, isn't it? But the things that have always been most important to me, you know, there's a lot of different ways to be a journalist, and a lot of people have different motivations for getting into broadcast news or any kind of news. And some people are, you know, they do what Hank Winchester does, and they're consumer advocates. They do what Karen Drew does, and she's, you know, an investigative reporter. I mean, there's a lot of different, but I got into it because I loved the idea of writing the first draft of history. My journalism hero was Homer. I wanted to write the Iliad and the Odyssey every day. And it's funny because when I say that to high school kids, sometimes they'll be like, Homer Simpson? Yeah, no, Homer. And so I really think that there is a craft to writing that first draft of history. And so, you know, as you know, writing is my favorite part of what we do. And so I hope that the way that I have chronicled the times in which we lived has been appreciated and valued. I think that the town crier role that we play is the one that's overlooked often. I think at the end of a newscast, I hope people are leaving, well, I know what's happening in my city, in my state, my country, and in my world today. That's really what I think is a really valuable thing for us to do. And so I've tried to do that with a sense of fairness, with a sense of clear-headedness. Obviously, I love politics. I love covering politics. It's always seemed to me to be a really good sign that most of the hate mail that I get seems to run both directions.
They don't know if you're a Democrat or Republican.
I get people furious with me because they think I'm such a liberal, and then the next letter or email will be somebody who cannot understand why Channel 4 puts a conservative like me on TV. And that's just, that's a pretty good sign. So I have tried to be an aggressive Switzerland. Most of the time. In fact, I've thought about getting a Swiss flag as a tattoo, because I just think, and this is a time, and I feel extremely strongly about this. Neutral journalism feels so under assault right now, and there's so many people who seem to doubt that it's possible. Like, well, you can't possibly be expected to keep your opinion to yourself. what?
Mm-hmm.
I am not in the opinion business. I've never felt like I should be in the opinion business. I'm in the accuracy business. I'm in the truth business. And that's one thing I think that a lot of people misunderstand about reporters. You know, I don't share an opinion on the air, but I will wake up at 2:30 in the morning and sit bolt upright in bed and go, oh my gosh, did I say 1967 instead of 1968? That's the stuff that will, you know, drive me insane. And so I hope that I guess I would love to be remembered as somebody who was aggressively fair.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned your love for writing, and I know you said that it'll be up to other people to write your legacy. You have written so many goodbyes for so many people.
I thought they were going to ask me to write my own.
Write your own. So, you know, as far as your writing, where does the love for writing come from?
I have to credit, I think I just got very lucky with English teachers when I was young, especially in high school. I had an English teacher at Junction City High School in Junction City, Kansas, my junior and senior year. Deanna Tracine gave us as an assignment once to write a children's story. And I wrote a story called The Journey to the City, The Adventures of Bernard, Maynard, and Barnyard. I still have it at home, and it was my favorite school assignment that I was ever given. And it was a life-changing high school English assignment. Because then when I got to KU, I studied children's literature, I studied fiction writing, and I mean, I had always liked to write and make up stories. In fact, when I was a Cub Scout, when we would go on campouts, everybody would be given a job. Somebody was in charge of making sure the campfire kept burning. Somebody was in charge of making sure that the tents were pitched right. My job, believe it or not, was to tell the story around the fire that night. And I would just make it up out of my head.
Like what? Like what?
I can't even, I don't remember, I can't remember one offhand, but you know,
but just
that
making
was
up stories about the day, or just
no. I would
just
just make up a story. And I would do it a lot with the kids. When they were in the bath, I would have a guitar, and we would just make up a song on the fly, and it would be a story, a song. And so I've just always loved storytelling, and that's really what you at the end of when you get through all of the microphones and the lights and the cameras, what a journalist really is a storyteller. And what a songwriter really is a storyteller. And what a children's author is a storyteller. So even though I think to a lot of people it's always looked like I've been spread out all over the place, it all pivots around the same center, which is telling a good story. That's what I really love. And so I fell in love with storytelling, which means that I fell in love with writing. I have to explain that to kids a lot of times. I'll show up at a classroom and I'll say, how many people here think they're good writers? And a couple of hands go up. And then if I say, how many kids here think they're good storytellers? More hands go up, because sometimes we confuse handwriting or the act of putting words on a page with being a writer. And if you're a good storyteller, you are a good writer. We got to help you translate it to either a page or a way for other people to hear the story that you've made up or have written. But you are a good storyteller, and that means you are a good writer.
Sure. You also, of course, have a love for music.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you saved all your dollars in a mayonnaise jar because you had your eye on a sweet guitar. That's a line from a song.
I love that you know that.
I know the words to Devin's songs.
Yes, you do.
Where'd the love for music come from?
That probably also came a lot from Mom, because I had a lot of musical theater music in the house growing up. She was really into standards and jazz. My dad was the one who was a little bit more into country music. I can still remember him bringing me one of the first albums. In fact, the first album he just brought me home a copy of a Chris Christopherson album once. Said, I think you'd like this guy. Yeah, I mean, I was like, well, yeah, and of course I did. I mean, legendary songwriter. So the country part came, from Dad in Western Kentucky, which is where he's from, and then, but I also, I love standards and music theatrical music, all that kind of stuff. So that's where all that came together. And then once I got to college and started playing the guitar, and then there again, I was like, oh, well, this is a pretty good place to write stories, right? Just move it over to the guitar a little bit. And so it's been a funny thing. And then I started playing guitar a lot in Oklahoma City. And I was worried that I thought, people want their anchor man to be out singing and playing guitar? I mean, there was even somebody had done an editorial cartoon in one of the papers, and it said something about, KFOR's singing anchorman things getting out of hand. And it was a picture of me playing the guitar, and it said, trouble today, 2 kids stole a Slurpee and did not pay, or something like that. I don't remember, something along those lines. But in Oklahoma City, country music is really such a part of the fabric of life. I came to realize that people there would have been like, well, of course he sings country music. Why wouldn't he? Well, and then when I got here, I found out that there was a much bigger country music sort of community than I would have expected in Motown. And I got invited to come, play at some things, and I needed a band to back me up. And I found a couple of guys who already had kind of played. And now Arizona Sun and I've been together for 26, 27 years or something like that. So
wow.
It's been great fun.
Incredible. Just incredible. So were your parents, your dad playing music, in the house often, or would he ever say to you, Devin, are you listening to words of this music? Because I find myself asking my son, did you hear what Stevie Wonder said? Do you understand what he's talking about? Was it ever a conversation?
My mom loves to write, and she came more at that from that side of things. I think my dad would have, we'd have music on in the car. My dad really struggled to carry a tune, but mom, sang a lot, played piano. I took piano lessons and played the cello. And so my mom was wonderful with both my brother and I about encouraging any of that sort of creative direction. And so it was sort of, my mom was the right brain of the house, my dad was the left brain of the house.
Yep.
And then Troy and I, my brother is a creative director in an ad agency. So.
And you have 4 children in the arts, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And married an artist.
Right,
Corey,
right,
yeah.
And a co-anchor who sings during the commercials, which explains why you never complain about my singing.
I love that you sing all day long. It's fantastic. You also happen to have a terrific voice, but your memory for jingles has always just been...
It's my ear.
It's money, yes, yeah. No, I recognize the gene, so...
Yeah, this is why we connect so
well.
well.
We've gotten along so well over these
over these years.
I'm not sure how scientific we can expect all this to be. There does seem to be a little problem with honesty here.
Tell me your feelings on the future of local journalism and how it has evolved over your 30-year career here and beyond.
Well, there's always technical revolutions that are happening. I came along just as microwave was really starting to be the thing, and that seems so quaint now, right? Ooh, in fact, I did the first ever microwave live shot for WAND TV in Decatur, Illinois. It was from the very first Farm Aid concert in Champaign, Illinois. And, back in those days, of course, it was you slung a tape deck over your shoulder, and then the camera was separate. They were connected. And, and now here we are today on a phone. Or, it's really, so there's always been that part. What's been more troubling, though, is that we've arrived at a crisis in American journalism where a lot of people don't believe what we say. Now, I will say that is a bigger problem at the national and cable level than it is on the local level. Local news is far more trusted, and that's why I'm pretty bullish still on local news. Mm-hmm. If I want to find out what happened today in Tel Aviv, there's a lot of places that I can find that out. If I want to know what happened today in Detroit, just a handful of places I can go for that. So I'm still pretty bullish on local news, and because local news doesn't delve into opinion as much, I think our reputations have been kept a little cleaner over, well, like what, cable news. All of a sudden, everybody seems to be washed with a brush. But this is something, KG, that we we have got no choice but to get this right.
Right now, American journalists are working in insane conditions to try to bring you the latest in a situation that is unprecedented for all of us. And I've never been prouder, the people in this building, of my colleagues at papers and television.
One of the things I will remember about anchoring alongside you was the time where it was during the pandemic. We had taken a special report. We heard from the president, and he made some disparaging remarks about the media. And you totally went off script, and I really didn't know what to say, to be honest, but I was so happy that you said what you did say. Can you remember that moment and just take me back to what you were thinking?
Still a little ambivalent about it, because I thought it was an important thing to say, and yet, not, as I said earlier, I'm not really in the opinion business. But I thought that was a real unfair broadside on our profession at a time when people really needed to be able to trust what we were telling them. And we were also trying to be as honest as we could about what we didn't know at the time. And there was plenty of that. And the conditions that we were all trying to work in, we'd never, ever approached anything like that in any of our journalism careers. And it just seemed a really counterproductive thing for a president to say, and I basically said so. And I remember walking into the newsroom after that newscast and getting a standing ovation from the newsroom, which I appreciated, because it meant that I was standing up for a bunch of people that I care deeply about and admire, and wanted to support at a time when really we just didn't know what the next day was going to bring. But I also felt like, I kind of, I don't want to say I lost my cool, but obviously it hit a nerve with me, and I was afraid I had taken the bait, I guess is what I would say. But I thought I would get deluged with a fair amount of hate mail. It probably ran about 90-10. 90% of what I heard was from people who were like, good for you. And then the other 10, it was funny. I can still, the one email that I got from a woman said, you're so arrogant to think that he was talking about you. Well, I found out that the next day, the Radio Television News Directors Association sent the tape to the White House. And 2 days later, President Trump went to links in that afternoon's news briefing to say, I wasn't talking about everybody. So I have no idea if that was because of, that it had gotten, but I thought, well, okay, well then, at least that's a little bit better and fair. But yeah, it's funny that if you Google my name, that comes up pretty quickly, because that made the rounds all over the country pretty fast. It's often pointed out that journalism is a business. There's no doubt about that. Of course it is. But it's the only business mentioned by name in the Constitution. It is a terribly vital part of a functioning democracy. And I have been places in the world where people don't have access to information. They're not, those places, life is pretty tough. It's Cuba. It's China. It's Russia. Information is the most valuable resource in the world. And those of us who are given the responsibility of being its caretaker, of making sure that we are completely devoted to transparency and accuracy and understanding where information is coming from, we are tasked with this amazing responsibility, but so are the people who watch us. It is a responsibility to be an informed American. And if you are only going to the place that gives you the version of something in the way that aligns with your life, that's not a great place to be. Everybody needs a full, steady, think of the food pyramid. Don't be getting all of your meals at the same place. Mm-hmm. I mean, I read so many different news sources every day. It's a very balanced diet, and I recommend that for everybody. I don't want anybody to get all of their news only from Channel 4. Can't believe I'm saying that. Yeah. But no, we need to be a part of your diet. But this is on Americans to understand just how important and how critical this is. But it's also on us to make sure that we're there when they need us. I will always believe in standing up for our profession. I think it's a very noble and honorable profession that you and I have chosen. But I also know that it's, it is, as I said earlier, it's part of my job is to keep my cool.
Good evening, I'm Devin Scillian. Tonight's big
We
story
really
is a
did make the
huge
right choice.
development
I mean,
for
you and
downtown
Devin look
Detroit.
great
We
together at
expect to hear
11.
from
Thanks. Have you
city
seen any of the special?
So you, let's go back 30 years when you arrived in Detroit as a reporter, 1995. You're taking over for Mort Krim, who he himself a titan of a news anchor in Detroit. Talk about some of the big stories that you remember from 1995.
Well, let me first just say that you and I both broke my rule, which is don't ever try to replace a legend. I, ended up doing it, trying to replace Mort Krim, and you tried to, trying to replace Carmen Harlan. I think that for both of us, we were very lucky to be at a TV station that knew what it was doing and knew how to make that happen. And fortunately for both of us, Mort wanted to leave. He was not being forced out, and obviously the same thing is true of Carmen. So we were set up, I think, to succeed, which helped a lot. But at the time, as I remember how bleak Detroit kind of was at that especially you could really sense it at night. I love that Channel 4 is downtown. We're not one of the Southfield stations, and I have always loved that we are right here downtown in Detroit. But back in those days, trying to find dinner downtown, there were just a handful of choices. It meant a lot of Greek salads from Nicky's down the road. There weren't a whole lot of choices. Now it's what a different world that we're in now. Now we can't even get around all the places that are there for us. But that sort of, the fact that you could fire a cannon up Woodward at night back in those days and probably not hit anything, that was a part of the story that we were covering a lot then. It was this really troubled city that had a long way to go to get back. And then, things started to happen. CompuWare moved downtown. Blue Cross Blue Shield moved downtown. Edsel Ford led the changes to create something, to create this big public space in Campus Martius, and look at what that is today. So it was brick by brick, but man, it felt like it took a long time to bake each brick back then, and it was it was glacial for a while. But at the same time, there were also one of the greatest journalistic experiences of my life will always be that first Red Wings parade, Stanley Cup parade in 1997. To look all up and down Woodward, all across Hart Plaza in this sea of red and white, just more people than any of us could ever have imagined seeing in downtown Detroit at one time. And it was not only this great celebration of what the Wings had done, ending that long drought, but it was also a real indicator of what Detroit could be, right? You and I have been fortunate to see a lot more of that in the time, like the NFL draft.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was just a lot of fits and starts and stops and starts. But little by little, we really got to watch this, and I've loved it. I've loved that Corey was kind of a part of it. Corey was the board chair at Pewabic Pottery for a while, and so we both just really feel like we got to have a front row seat on this really wonderful renaissance that has taken place. Didn't realize at the time that the city had to go through bankruptcy to get there. That might have hastened things, but that was awfully painful and horrible. And a true existential crisis for a great American city. But I think today, the outlook, not just here in Detroit, has changed, but the whole country, the whole world feels differently about Detroit. You know how I feel about Detroit's place in music history. It is the greatest music city in the world, and that's fantastic, and people understand its position and what it was able to do, and being the arsenal of democracy and helping win World War II. And of course, it put the world on wheels. So there's so much to celebrate about this city, but in lots of new ways now that are really thrilling, really thrilling. So to have been here that night at the opening of the train station.
Yeah.
And I was one of the folks who thought, let's please tear that down, because I'm sick and tired of it being the symbol of everything that's wrong with Detroit. And then look what Bill Ford did. And so I feel so lucky to have seen all the things I've seen.
Absolutely. And you've had extensive travel too. In fact, when you first started in 1995, you were here 3-4 months, and then they shipped you off to Israel.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, and about 24 hours later, I was on a plane to Israel. And it was such a gift. I can still remember, and I was lucky because at K4, where I worked in Oklahoma City, same thing. It was a station that believed that we're going wherever the news is. So I had been to Russia, I had been to Haiti, I'd been to the Middle East, and then I come here and I'm off to Israel, and I can still remember what an eye-opener. Every place I've ever been in the world has somehow changed my perception of what I thought going in. And I can remember that night. We first arrived, we got a taxi cab from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem for our first live shot. I have a Palestinian cab driver, and he is so distraught. He said, I feel like I lost a brother. I was like, you're Palestinian? And he had felt like Yitzhak Rabin was his brother. And I started to realize that this was a place that was being so contaminated by the extremes on both sides, that if the middles could have gotten together, there was an awful lot more common ground than I had ever fully appreciated at the time. Yitzhak Rabin was part of that, I think. But it was such a gift to get to, every foreign assignment that the station's ever given me has been, don't tell the station, but I would have done it for free. Because I've just learned so much about the world, and it taught me an awful lot about this extraordinary city where we live that is so uniquely positioned to view and understand what goes on in the Middle East, with this massive Arab American population, huge Jewish population that we have. I mean, it's just it's such a melting pot of things in Detroit. So yeah, that was my first foreign assignment at DIV, and I thought, yeah, I'm in the right place. This is where I need to be.
Yeah. And you kind of get back, and you do America's Thanksgiving Parade and Hobnoble Gobble, and it just goes on and on. And then, was it 1 year then that you did before Mort passed the torch to you?
It was a little less than a year that I took over the 11. The following spring, I took over the 11, and then Mort did just the 5 and 6 for almost another year, I think it was. And then, so there was it was very kind of a gradual thing, which was great, because I got the benefit of working with Mort and around Mort, and kind of learning an awful lot about how the city worked. Neil Shine, at the time at the Detroit Free Press, was such a great help to me in understanding Detroit. So many people that really helped me kind of figure my way at Carmen, of course. I mean, I was so lucky to get next to this real daughter of Detroit. So it was very gradual, and then before I knew it, then it just was in my blood, and I couldn't get out of that place.
Sure. I get it. I still get tickled sometimes when we're out together, and I'll always remember when I came for one of my interviews, and we went out for lunch, and the waitress was so happy to see you, and I thought, wow, Devin's really the man here. And then when we were leaving, she said, bye, Mr. Krim.
That's right.
And I thought, he's been here, at that time, is 20 years, and they're still calling him Mort
yeah, I
Krim.
still get that every once in a while. There is something, and this is like a number of cities in America where people are so devoted to their anchors in Detroit. I mean, there were Bill Bonds people, and there were Mort Krim people, and there were Joe Glover people. I mean, this long list of luminaries who've been the anchors here, power people, you know, Carmen, Diana Lewis. I could go on, Ruth Spencer, Sherry Margolis. I could go on and on and on of these people who have just made such a, and people are very devoted to it, because people in Detroit, that's one of the blessings about being here. And you know this, because you look at our ratings compared to like San Francisco.
Oh yeah.
Nobody's
watching the news in San
Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
People watch the news here. People care, and they are very, very connected to you and I. Yeah. It is always so great when, and I know you must hear this all the time too, people will say, you know, I feel like you're family. Well, that's how it's supposed to, that's when it's working right.
Yeah, yeah. I go sometimes places and people will know Basil's name and know Basil, but then they say, Carolyn? It's so funny.
You have been, oh my gosh, he's already, he's supplanting you.
Exactly, but it reminds me of what you say about the promo that when your girls were born, and how the viewers had such a connection to your family. And I feel that too, that after I had a child here, it was just like, I don't know, it was, I was always accepted. And Carmen and you made that transition, like you say, very seamless. And I'm really fortunate to have received that. But when I had a kid, and you had kind of the same experience.
Same experience. We got here, and 2 months later, we were pregnant with twins. Pregnant with a third who decided to bring a +1. And they were born then at Henry Ford Hospital the following spring in April. And there's something about that not only grounds you to where you are, but it grounds where you are to you. And yeah, we did this promo where I talked about, but when I look at my daughters, my Detroit-born twin daughters, and people to this day ask me that exact phrase, how are your Detroit-born twin daughters? That's the power of place here. Right?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It really is. I don't know that we could go any other place and it be this really intimate connection to the people that are our viewers and the people that we serve, and it just is a blessing.
It really is. It is. I'm so fortunate. So fortunate. My whole family feels fortunate about that.
But it was also a story of epic resilience. June had been homeless 7 times in her life. After a 36-year struggle.
Are there any stories that touched you personally? You know, I can think of the story, the woman that you helped with her house. I know that one. So you've talked to me about
the June Walker story is really the Jerry Gumbert story, right? He's the one who decided to just make her whole in that house, and that has stayed with me forever, in the sense that, of course, it wasn't that long ago, really. But what has stayed with me about that story, and this is what I want to reiterate when we re-air it, is that at a certain point in the story, Jerry said, you know, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I'm going to seize it today. If we could all think about our opportunity to do something for someone else as our opportunity, I think people would have thought, gosh, what a great opportunity that was for June Walker to get her house paid for. Jerry thought the opportunity was his. Mm-hmm. What an unbelievable outlook on life. And how much better would our world be if more people saw the opportunity of giving rather than an opportunity of taking. I thought that was stunning. You know, the story of Ray Gray, who spent almost 5 decades in prison wrongly. I was just a small part of you know, there were so many people, Innocence Project, all these people who worked on getting Ray out of prison, you know, and it wasn't that long after the story that I did on it that he walked out, and that just, that's an amazing thing to have felt like I was a part of at all. You know, I've covered so many different horrible things over the years, you know, natural disasters, the bombing in Oklahoma City, the World Trade Center, 2 World Trade Center bombings, really, because I was at the first one, too. You know, there's just the resilience of the human spirit. I always say that when the world is getting you down, look up, because there's so much. One of my favorite stories right now is every day what the Hubble Space Telescope or the Webb Space Telescope sends us. There's just so much potential out there. I got to interview Francis Collins, who helped lead the effort to sequence and catalog the human genome. I mean, the potential that we have as human beings is just so vast, and we get so bogged down in our nonsense, in our little petty, gripes and turf wars. Those are the stories that I've always really loved covering, is those moments when we can look up a little bit and think about our higher purpose and our better angels.
These kids don't want to settle for lip service from the store owners, so they're asking them to sign a contract promising not to sell cigarettes to minors, no ifs, ands, or cigarette butts.
I wanted to ask you about your, so many things I admire about you, but another one of those things is your ability to turn a phrase when you're anchoring it, and it adds just the appropriate tone and humor if need be. And it's like you've got a pocket full of these country western type phrases, idioms, I don't really know what to call them, that I think makes you so very special and unique as a newsman. And it makes people feel like they know you and you're really relatable and down to earth. And I mean, maybe it comes from your acting, but how do you have like a book of them somewhere?
I don't. I think a lot of it had to do with spending some formative time in places like Texas and Oklahoma, where a turn of a phrase is it's a type of currency. Will Rogers is one of my absolute heroes. And that guy, just look up Will Rogers quotes sometime. It's like all he did was sit around and make up great things to say. I mean, it's amazing the kind of things that he would throw out there. One of my favorites was, he said, some people learn by reading, some people learn by watching others, but some people just have to pee on the electric fence themselves.
So good.
So great. And so I've always admired that. I've always admired when somebody is very quick with a quip. And when I was in Oklahoma, a guy who was one of my political mentors in really learning about American politics, former Attorney General of Oklahoma, a guy named Mike Turpin, he taught me so many of those. He has a million of them. He used to say politics was show business for ugly people. I mean, he had a million of them. And I just, there's something about that I guess I've always admired. But I do also think that there is a certain amount of wisdom in those things. Mm-hmm. And if you can call on them at the right time, they just seem to sort of put a little bow on, or maybe a big bow, but it just kind of wraps up a situation or a circumstance in a way that is immediately understandable and palatable. And so I've always admired it, and maybe that's why I've just sort of longed to have I know you and Adams look at me sometimes like, where in the world did that come from?
Exactly. It's fabulous. It's fabulous. If you could go back 30 years, what would you tell the Devin Scillian of 30 years ago?
It would be interesting, because one of the things I would tell him is, dude, relax. You're fine here. You don't have to keep looking and thinking about, what's next. This is great, and this is about as good as it gets.
So enjoy the moment.
Enjoy the moment and be present. I've gotten much better about that as time has gone on, but I was that eager young colt, running through the barn trying to get past all the other horses there for a while, and it probably kept us from just sort of feeling more settled. And Sinead O'Connor had an album title that I just thought was the wisest thing. One of her albums was titled, "I Do Not Want What I Do Not Have." And I think that's really what contentment is all about. And if maybe if I could have told that guy, you you don't need what you don't have. This is all good. It's all good. And I've been much better about it over the last couple of years, that's for sure. But because it's funny you would ask it that way, because I was kind of thinking about it in reverse a little bit when it was trying to decide if I wanted to retire. It wasn't what would I tell my younger self. It would, what would my younger self tell me? And that kid back at KU would have been going, hey, dude, you promised you'd get back to some of these other things. So it's later than you think.
I am currently in my 30th year here at WDIV, and maybe it's the roundness of that number, but I've decided it's time to move on to the next chapter of what has been a most enjoyable and gratifying book.
If you had one message to leave for Local 4 viewers in the city of Detroit, what would that message be?
Wow. Well, my message is just thank you. I feel like the luckiest guy on the planet. I cannot believe how my life has worked out. You know, when you're first starting to scrap your way through television, you're just you feel like you've thrown yourself into kind of a business that's almost a lottery. You know, is this ever going to work out? And I am just so deeply indebted to this city and Detroiters and Michiganders. You know, by growing up in the military, I really wasn't used to staying in one place for very long. And, you know, I've lived out now in Michigan so much longer than I've ever lived anywhere else. So I guess if I had to, on a piece of paper, maybe I would still, you know, on a resume, I would still say a Kansan, I guess. But no, there's no doubt about it. I'm a Michigander now. And this place has given me such unbelievable experiences. 10 Olympics? I mean, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
And you know how I feel about the Olympics, to get to cover that many Olympiads. I'm standing on St. Peter's Square the night that Cardinal Bergoglio is announced as Pope Francis. What am I, you gotta be kidding me. And I'm not Catholic, but it was kind of hard to not, you know, appreciate the enormity of the moment. And I've had so many experiences like that. Some of them right here, because there's some, you know, I've been able to meet and cover some unbelievable people and stories that are right here in our backyard. And then some of them have been things like the Red Wings parade, just to get to feel like a part of that. Or the what's funny will be, you know, last year covering the Lions. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And that's why I was never going to be able to really time my way out of this job, because there's always something right around the corner. Right. But my family and I just are filled with nothing but gratitude for the way that Detroit has taken us in, the way that Channel 4 has taken us in. And that's all I can leave anybody with, is just undying thanks.